Welcome, brave souls, to DrConjuring, a place where the dead still whisper and horror stories come to life. Please like this video and subscribe. Your support feeds the shadows, helping us create even more terrifying stories. We truly do appreciate it, and so do they. Now, let's begin. But be warned, some stories never let go. Horror Story 1. Buried Alive. In 1940, a strange figure was found wandering the Garmond Hill Cemetery, nestled in the quiet township of Jewel Lake, Maine. The man was in an appalling state, naked, disoriented, and unable to recall even his own name. His vision was so impaired that the officer who detained him had to provide polarized glasses to shield him from the searing sunlight. Given his condition, he was promptly taken to Baxter Hospital for an examination. Melissa Clark, the nurse who tended to him, later recalled that the man reeked of death like he had crawled from a decaying grave. After a thorough cleaning, including cutting his unkempt hair, trimming his grotesque nails, and administering a mild sedative, they managed to restore a semblance of humanity to his appearance. The man, who appeared to be in his 50s, accepted the care without resistance. When they offered him a chicken sandwich, he devoured it with an urgency that suggested he hadn't eaten in years. The attending physician, after examining him, wrote in his report that this individual had likely spent an extraordinary amount of time underground. His eyes were tiny and resembled those of a blind mole. His skin was scalier than a lizard's, and he displayed severe issues with reflexes and joint movement. There were also signs of severe malnutrition, coupled with a disturbed mental state marked by disorientation and possible amnesia, indicating that he'd endured extreme isolation. Several days later, the man was discharged and taken to the police station for questioning. His statement, transcribed below, sent chills down the officers' spines. "I suffer from claustrophobia, which is why I specified in my will that I wanted to be cremated after my death. A trainee at the insurance company filled out the paperwork, and I just signed it. My biggest mistake was not asking for a copy. A couple of years later I collapsed and supposedly died, or so those who found me, the judge and the coroner, believed. The paperwork was filled out incorrectly, and instead of being cremated as I had requested, I was buried alive." Imagine the panic I felt when I woke up, trapped in that confined space. At first, I didn't know if I was caught in a nightmare or an unimaginable reality. Could I have Cotard's syndrome, a rare disorder where someone believes they are dead, that they don't exist, or that their body is decomposing? Or was it a medical error, a misdiagnosed case of catatonia? The sensations were too real, so I leaned toward the latter. I had to overcome my primal fear, the kind that sent violent tremors through my body. Once I regained some composure, I tried to assess the situation. The silence in that coffin was absolute, save for the pounding of my own heartbeat and the faint vibrations of worms crawling through the earth. The reality was undeniable. I was there, trapped in a wooden box, suffocating in humidity and consumed by the dark, a darkness that threatened to swallow my sanity. At first I screamed until my throat bled, clawed at the lid until my nails tore. But death never came. My body refused to give up. Days passed, maybe even weeks, and hunger twisted my insides with unbearable pain. Then something moved between my legs. A rat had gnawed through a corner of the coffin. I caught it with trembling hands and tore it apart with my teeth. Its warm blood slid down my throat, rekindling the flicker of life within me. I didn't feel disgust, only a raw, primal satisfaction, a strength I never knew I had. I learned to survive by drinking my own urine and waiting for the next rat. Fortunately, there were plenty of them. During that nightmare, I changed. My nails grew long and sharp like claws. My eyes shrank to better capture the faintest glimmer of light. My hair grew sparse and tangled. By the time I escaped, madness had already taken root in my mind. I fed on worms, rats, and the fresh flesh of the recently buried, guided by a nose that could track death. I drank rainwater as it seeped through the earth. The police couldn't believe his story. When they apprehended him, he couldn't even say how long he had been buried, but based on the position of his grave and the date of his supposed death, it had been 10 long years. Tears welled up in his eyes as he described how, over time, his flesh had hardened and his skin turned as pale as a corpse's belly. He had grown accustomed to the shadows, to the underground life. He learned to dig tunnels and slip beneath the cemetery like a spectre, always watching. The surface above became his hunting ground. Those who came to mourn never saw the eyes that stared at them from the cracks in the earth. On moonlit nights, when the mourners leaned over an open grave, he would crawl from his hiding place, dragging them down into the dark, devouring them before the worms had a chance. He was no longer human, nor was he a living corpse. He had become something else, something that lived in the shadows, a creature of the underworld. And his hunger never ceased. The officers, both horrified and stunned, managed to confirm his story by cross-referencing his account with recent reports of disappearances in the cemetery. That was Buried Alive. And now it's time for Horror Story 2, Infernal Blindness. The Countess of Blazes lived a double life. By day, she was the picture of nobility, graceful, dignified, fulfilling her duties with the precision of royalty. But by night, she became a priestess of the devil, summoning her dark master in blood-soaked rituals, though always in vain. Her husband, ignorant to the darkness that consumed her, saw her only as the embodiment of virtue. She never missed a Sunday Mass, and her generosity toward the orphanage and charity hospital was the talk of the town. Every full moon, at the stroke of midnight, the Countess would quietly slip from the marital bed after carefully drugging her husband with a potent sedative. Clad only in a black robe, her bare skin chilled by the night air, she would descend into the castle's cold, eerie dungeons where her fellow cultists awaited. The thick stone walls muffled the desperate cries of their victims. On the damp floor, an inverted pentagram was etched within a circle. The symbol of the goat's head, its shadow flickering in the torchlight. Among the figures gathered were a bishop, several nobles and their wives, and a strange old woman from the deep forest, known only as Maldikia. That night, the chosen sacrifice was none other than Elizabeth, her own daughter. It had been Maldicia who had suggested the offering. Only someone so intimately tied to you can summon the devil's attention. It must be done, the witch had decreed. Bound and gagged to the central post of the pentagram, Elizabeth trembled in terror. Her mind spun in a blur of confusion, sweaty, leering faces. The laughter, the sickening stench of the dungeon, rats scurrying beneath her feet. The most incomprehensible thing, however, was the sight of her mother standing before her, holding a gleaming knife in hand. As the cultists knelt outside the magic circle, Maldicia raised her arms, chanting in an ancient, forgotten tongue. Her words were solemn, but sounded rehearsed, mechanical, as though she herself didn't fully understand them. Whispers rippled among the crowd. Many had noted that her spells had never worked before, yet no one dared speak out. She chanted, "Belzebu ax raza, tuamen ac roulé." At last, the Countess thought, clutching the knife with trembling hands, "Immortality is within my reach, even if Elizabeth must pay the price." And then, from the far corner of the dungeon, a thick cloud of black smoke began to billow, swirling toward the center of the room. Slowly, a figure emerged from the smoke. The demon was not as described in the pages of the Black Bible, but there was no mistaking him. Towering, muscular, walking on two legs. He bore not the head of a goat, but that of a stag, crowned with enormous antlers like those mounted in the Count's hunting lodge. The pentagram wasn't branded on his forehead. It hung from his chest, a medallion on a heavy chain. His legs were covered in thick fur, hiding his hooves. Maldicia's face went pale. She had never expected it to work. After all, she was nothing more than a fraud, a parasite feeding off the gullibility of the castle's nobles. And she envied Elizabeth. But she quickly composed herself and limped toward the Countess. "Now do it! This is the moment!" she urged. Ecstatic, the Countess stepped forward, raising the knife to pierce her daughter's heart.
"Stop, whore!"
The devil bellowed. His voice boomed like thunder through the dungeon, and the room fell silent. The torches flickered wildly, as if whipped by an invisible wind. The Countess froze, the knife still raised, unable to move. Elizabeth, sensing her doom, fainted.
"You fools!"
The demon's voice thundered, shaking the very stone walls.
"Do you truly think such crude sacrifices would please me?"
No one dared move. The Countess felt the knife burn in her hand, as though the metal itself rejected her. She tried to speak, but her throat tightened, her mouth dry. For the first time in her life, she tasted true terror. The demon stepped forward, casting a shadow that seemed to swallow the entire room.
"Is this your offering to me?"
He roared, his voice rattling the stone. His antlers scraped against the central chandelier, making its light flicker and sputter. Meaningless deaths, spells muttered by a senile fraud. His gaze fell on Maldicia. The old witch collapsed to her knees, trembling. "Mercy, great lord, I only followed your will," she begged.
"My will?"
The demon sneered.
"Since when does a charlatan interpret my desires?"
With a sudden motion, he ripped the knife from the Countess's hand and slit the old woman's throat. Maldicia writhed in agony, her scream muffled by the blood pouring from the wound. Panic surged among the cultists. Should they run? Should they kneel? The bishop, who had remained silent until then, raised his inverted cross with trembling hands. "O Prince of Darkness, forgive our ignorance. Accept us as your humble servants," he cried. The demon turned slowly, grabbed the cross, and swung it like a club, smashing it into the bishop's skull. The man crumpled to the ground, howling like a wounded animal. Overcome with terror, the Countess found the strength to speak. I've served you faithfully," she whispered.
"Faithfully?"
The demon growled, lowering his face to hers. His fetid breath filled her nostrils, choking her.
"You've been blind, just like the rest of these imbeciles."
Suddenly, grotesque figures burst into the room servants of the damned, wearing horrific masks and carrying spears. The nobles, their faces pale with terror, began to stir. Some rushed toward the exit, but the door slammed shut with a deafening thud.
"No one leaves,"
the demon declared.
"Now you shall receive the true blessing of hell."
The air filled with screams, struggles, and desperate pleas, but it was all in vain. One by one, the survivors were slaughtered mercilessly. When the carnage ended, only 2 remained. The Countess, so terrified she had wet herself, and Elizabeth, still unconscious.
"Take your daughter and leave this place,"
the demon commanded.
"From now on, you will live by faith, devoted to those you once betrayed. That is your punishment. No more black masses. No more attempts to contact me. If I ever return, your fate will be the same as theirs."
Tears streaming down her face, the Countess nodded and untied her daughter, desperately trying to revive her. As she did, the servants of the devil gathered the bodies and burned them in a towering pyre outside the castle gates before vanishing into the night. The next morning, Elizabeth, still unaware of the horrors that had occurred, claimed she had a horrific, bloody nightmare. The Count smiled quietly, knowing the truth, while his wife, haunted and hollow-eyed, served him breakfast with loving care. But behind that warm smile, he hid a dark secret only he knew. That was tonight's chilling tale from DrConjuring's channel. If it sent shivers down your spine, please give us a like. It's completely free and helps us share these eerie stories with more brave souls like you. And if you're craving even more bone-chilling horror that will haunt your nights, don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell. You'll never miss a new upload, each story more terrifying than the last, delivered straight to your inbox. Thank you so much for listening. We truly appreciate every one of you. Good night, and remember, sleep with one eye open. You never know what might be watching. Ha ha.